Coming up on this week's Redcast.
The institutional side of the market has been able to build out very sophisticated, very complex and very expensive surveillance programs to monitor for the misconduct of either individuals within its own domain or clients or third parties executing transactions through its domain. When you start to see that filter and flow into the retail market, it's going to be difficult for retail providers to build that same level of complex capability at the margins of which they operate. It does create significant third-party risk management challenges for firms around how do you make sure that those capabilities that are being leveraged and are being used by the firm are operating in line with the firm's policy standards.
Social media channels that are part of communication surveillance already today. I think we're just expanding the scope here and recognizing how your employees could influence the market. And now that you're providing platforms where people can do this extensively, you need to take on the responsibility of making sure that your platforms aren't being leveraged to abuse the market.
We've now got, all this new data coming at us with new regs, additional complexity, a whole bunch of technology. We really have to think about how to reload this conversation and say, well, what are some of the key things we ought to be worried about, and how as an industry can we collectively get there?
Welcome to Redcast.
Redcast,
where we shine a light on banking digitization.
Hello, everybody. PJ, CEO and founder of JWG. I'm really pleased to be here again for a Redcast on digital surveillance. Before I introduce my panelists, let me quickly introduce the subject. We spent the last 18 months really digging through the post-pandemic agenda. And one of the big themes we've seen is the collision of non-financial risk controls in and around the democratization of finance. And when we talk about this space as digital integrity, but really what it seems to us to be about is the regulators across the globe are now shining their spotlights on the market abuse space. And they're not really liking what they see. And we have lots of concerns around working from home and the need to be thinking about the breadth of surveillance required during the pandemic. And then all of a sudden we had GameStop hit, and the lens really widened, right? And I think at the time, Richard was kind enough to come on and talk a couple Redcasts about it. We had a bunch of meetings with the industry. But what we've since now had a fine issued in September for MassMutual for an excess of $4 million for failing to supervise meme stock activity, because as it turns out, Roaring Kitty was actually an employee of MassMutual. And I think the thing the SEC was criticizing really came down to the fact that the firm failed to detect 250 hours of YouTube videos and almost 600 tweets, and a whole bunch of people knew but should have been controlling this activity that was outside the perimeter. So this has a lot of implications. First and foremost, we need to clearly understand and articulate what is it that the firms are supposed to be supervising out in the market. And we need to make sure we understand well what that means from a data collection point of view, an AI engine point of view, and third-party risk management point of view. So we've got a lot of data we ingest and look at as part of the surveillance process already. This is going to make it an awful lot more complicated and force an awful lot of change to a sector, which maybe that's healthy, maybe that's good, maybe that's what everybody wants to happen. But that's what we're here to talk about and figure out what it will all mean for the upcoming agenda. So without further ado, let me quickly turn to our panelists to introduce themselves. Richard, you're no stranger to Redcast, but please go ahead.
Thanks, PJ. My name is Richard Bain. I'm a Senior Compliance Manager for State Street Corporation. I lead the enterprise-wide conduct, risk and surveillance operation for the firm. I'm looking forward to get a little deeper into this topic today.
Steve.
Yeah, Steve Legalbo. I am a product director at Nice Actimize with the financial market compliance line of business. So our team is responsible for our suite of surveillance products, which include solutions to help firms detect potential issues of market abuse, helping firms ensure proper client suitability, and helping clients perform proper communication surveillance. So happy to be here and for my first Redcast session.
Thanks, Stephen. And as everyone, of course, is aware, we will be having you back again with a couple other colleagues for our annual conference coming up soon. So I think one of the things we want to do in this session is help define what are some of those key questions we want to be covering with everybody in a broader space. But Richard, just starting with you, tell us about democratized finance. What does that really mean, and how has it changed the game for what surveillance professionals have to do?
Yeah, well, in short, what it means is that financial markets are no longer the domain of the professional, right? Any relatively unsophisticated investor, via the arena of retail products and services that directly expose individuals to financial markets, can quickly access those markets and trade in a range of relatively complex products and services. So so it gives the retail investor sort of financial freedom and financial control over their investment approach, but also exposes them to perhaps market risk and conduct risk and other forms of risk that perhaps they are less familiar with, and is often being more at the forefront of the professional domain than it has at the individual domain. In terms of the game, from a surveillance standpoint, I don't think the game's changed all that much. What I would say is, specifically as it relates to the democratization of financial markets, what has changed is there's now new players in the game, right? And there's a much more diverse range of skills and expertise at play within that game. And as a consequence of that, we have to be mindful now that we have largely the retail client base that is now directly accessing financial markets are not going to be able to come at those markets with the same level of knowledge, expertise, experience, and understanding of risk that professionals do. So for me, from a surveillance standpoint, the institutional side of the market has been able to build out very sophisticated, very complex, and very, very expensive surveillance programs to monitor for the misconduct of either individuals within its own domain or clients or third parties executing transactions through its domain. When you start to see that filter and flow into the retail market, it's going to be difficult for retail providers to build that same level of complex capability at the margins of which they operate. And it also is going to create extensive challenges from a data privacy standpoint for those houses that engage directly with that retail investor base. And I can tell you, whether you're on the retail side of this, the institutional side of this, most are using, vendor-based solutions who have built capability to solve the surveillance problem in this space, which I'm sure Steve will touch on later. But it does create significant third-party risk management challenges for firms around how do you make sure that those capabilities that are being leveraged and are being used by the firm are operating in line with the firm's policies, standards, and the firm's regulatory, legal, and contractual requirements. So, key there is going to be actually be able to not just outsource the capability, but to demonstrate that you have effective control over that solution, even though you're relying on a third party to provide that capability.
So in essence, the game hasn't changed that much. It's just that the scope of the players in the game has forced a much more digital approach, and that will rely on other people's kit as well as what the firms use internally.
Absolutely. The players on the pitch have changed. I often liken this to sort of a golf analogy. I don't know if this is a good or a bad one, right? But across the whole landscape of golf, from professionals right through to your 26 handicapper, the rules are the same. The game is the same. There is no variation depending on your experience or your ability. And that's really the same when it comes to market abuse. Although I'm not entirely sure the retail investor understands that, right? And so they're now being able to play a game with the same rules and the same level of access to some sectors as some of those professional investors once could. And that's going to evolve the way that regulators and those people responsible for surveilling market conduct risk need to respond.
Yeah. First of all, I personally feel called out with the 26 handicap playing golf. So, but no, I think what's changed is a bit of the coverage that now surveillance teams need to think about, especially if you're providing the platform or the facility for these investors to use to trade. And you need to account for your employees' behavior as well, and how they could potentially have access to information or knowledge or what they're doing outside of your walls to influence what's happening. So I think for a long time we've been talking about conflicts of interest. We're monitoring for that. We monitor as employees' personal trading activity to ensure that they're not taking advantage of any information that they have access to. This is kind of similar, where it's almost like you need to register your social media accounts. I mean, we've seen that even with a lot of communication surveillance requirements, where firms are requiring their employees to register their Facebook accounts if they're going to be talking about business, and even their Facebook has facilities where you can deploy apps and capture that communication, or other channels as well. LinkedIn as a channel. So there's many social media channels that are part of communication surveillance already today. I think we're just expanding the scope here and recognizing how your employees could influence the market. And now that you're providing platforms where people can do this extensively, you need to take on the responsibility of making sure that your platforms aren't being leveraged to abuse the market. And that's what's changed. I think the scope of what we need to monitor, and ensuring that our platforms are not being taken advantage of.
So why is it that the scope is that much of a bigger deal? We just have to throw more processing power at it, or is it more complicated? I mean, I look at all the people speaking in emojis and different languages, and trader language and non-trader language and roaring kitty language and Reddit language, and tell me more about what some of that challenge is all about.
I mean, there's a lot of challenges. You named quite a few of them already. First of all, access to these social media networks that are growing outside of our four walls. I mean, it's every day there's a new channel that somebody can communicate over, and you can't even identify them all. I'm sure there's groups out there that we don't even have access to, that are communities that are growing. They need to accept people to be participating in these groups. Even some of these Reddit communities, not everybody can join. You need to be a member, and you need to be accepted to be a member. So how could we, as compliance experts, gain access to this information? So that's where there's some level of employee conduct also that we need to account for. How can we make sure that our employees are following the rules and participating in any good conduct initiatives that we have? So access to information is a challenge. You're right. The type of channels like video, you mentioned YouTube channels, video analytics, video consumption, the data volumes just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So how do we manage that? So some of that's technology, understanding languages. That's part of the evolution of AI and natural language processing. We continue to get better at understanding the human language, adding that multiple languages capabilities to that. So it's continual evolution of technology and just kind of learning as we go. I think people are always going to try to circumvent the system or learn how to adapt, and we need to adapt with them and be more proactive with our approach.
And firms are going to rely upon their vendors to kind of help come up with these new standards and frankly, all the technical smarts required to process this amount of information, because obviously the sharp guys in compliance are good, but they're not all data scientists. I guess, Richard, from your point of view, what do you worry about from thinking about a third-party solution coming in-house, and how do you make sure it adheres to the firm's ethics and values?
Yeah, I mean, so I think in terms of third-party solutions, the reason why let me just touch on why they're so critical first and foremost, right? Third-party solutions can build scale, adaptability at a pace that traditional financial services institutions cannot move at, right? With the complexity and often the bureaucracy around those organizations. If you look at our industry-wide average among those, certainly those tier one banks, some of those will be spending in excess of a year on their surveillance for market conduct risk. From a lot of those participants is they're still not where they need to be, right? They're still evolving. They're still trying to get to where they ought to be and where they would feel comfortable at. And as a consequence of that, a lot of people feel, well, they're in amongst the pack, but they're not quite where they'd hope to be or want to be. But when you think about bringing in, there's a couple of benefits there, right? Why you can build scale and you can build adaptability and you can implement quickly through a vendor solution that you can't necessarily do, building in-house solution. So that's some pros there, but also there's some challenges, right? And so if I think particularly with third-party risk management, there's a clear trend from our regulators, particularly in Europe, where they have a real focus on the outsourcing of risk management by financial institutions, right? And whenever we want to cut it, we are outsourcing a piece of our risk management apparatus to a third-party vendor solution if we're going to bring them in-house to help us build that scale and adaptability and bring that that expertise that they have. Kind of key is to that is making sure that you have to make sure when you go through that process, you're very clearly documenting what are the service bringing on, what risks are they mitigating, and how. And so, what does the complexity of that infrastructure and that onboarding look like? You also need to build solutions that enable you to monitor, all the various components of that solution, the inputs, the processing, the outputs, to make sure that actually that service capability that you're relying on is mitigating the risk that it's designed to do. And then the third piece is you have to continue to evolve, and sort of it is almost certainly true that the goalposts will always keep getting further away. We might never quite get to the end state, and so making sure you're very, I'd say have a strong foundational understanding of what you're implementing, why you're implementing it, what are all of the implications of that. Have a program in place to monitor the effectiveness of that solution, and then as the output of that monitoring and other inputs from sort of regulatory change management processes, guidance from regulators, outputs from the capability itself, use all that information, that value-adding information, to tune to the point where you can get an optimized solution that's continually evolving along with what you're learning.
Yeah, I guess that, you've covered an awful lot of good practical advice there. I guess we don't have time to get into it all now, but Steve, what are some of the critical questions you'll be speaking about at the conference that people typically have in this area?
I would reiterate what Richard said about the continuous improvement. I think that's definitely inherent to any surveillance solution that you're implementing. You need to have a continual process to evaluate what's been done in the previous cycle, look at ways to improve, look at ways to get better at what we're doing, and enhancing our surveillance process. And I think that's also where cloud technologies have also helped us to keep up with the pace. So I don't think anyone could have predicted what happened earlier on this year, the types of volumes that were generated as a result of this market activity, the demand for more channels that came about as a result of the pandemic. But some of these things were just unanticipated, so we weren't equipped with some of the let's say the on-premise type physical server deployments that were managing the surveillance workload previously. Just couldn't keep up. So that also was a heavy driver towards adopting cloud technologies, bringing data together, and then it helped us to learn how we can leverage the data in more intelligent ways. I think that's the evolution. Is how do we get smarter about what we're doing and leveraging the information that we have, and these are some of the things that we're doing now to try to get ahead of the issues that we saw earlier on in the year with GameStop. So can we leverage these AI intelligence to look at what's happening in the market and predict and see what are some of these anomalies that are happening, and how can we leverage that information to look at what we're doing and correlate that and better predict which maybe employees are involved in those activities, or how do we get ahead of any potential problems before they create issues for us. So now it's about leveraging the data, getting smarter about compliance, and not just taking a reactive approach, looking at some rules that we know of things we want to look at, generating alerts and looking at them. It's getting sight into the hotspots. Where within our organization do we have issues? Is it issues with training our employees? Is it issues with the way individuals are communicating with each other or outside of the organization? What are the types of behaviors that we could zoom in on that can help us get ahead of problems and find the red flags that could protect the market and protect the business?
Yeah, I hear what you both are saying. I guess from my perspective, this whole line one, line two, line 1.5 conversation is great, but it's a bit of a dinosaur water cooler chat. We've now got all this new data coming at us with new regs, additional complexity, a whole bunch of technology. We really have to think about how to reload this conversation and say, well, what are some of the key things we ought to be worried about, and how as an industry can we collectively get there? And that is, I think, the exciting opportunity we have at this particular conference. I guess looking at the type of lineup that we've got, what are you most looking forward to hearing on the day? What are some of the key things you're hoping to take away?
I'm really interested in hearing how our community is dealing with the adoption of these AI technologies, and how regulators expect us to use those and report on those, and ensure that we're, first of all, not dropping the ball anywhere or missing things by leveraging or adopting these things, making sure we have the right coverage and explainability in these technologies. So I think that's been a question in a lot of people's minds, is how do we know that the machine is really helping us out here and not missing things that we would pick up. So I think that's a hot topic these days. Another is we're talking about a lot more data now. How do we manage where that data sits and who's looking at it? How do we monitor it, especially as it relates to the privacy issues that come up all the time? So these are some of the topics that I think are really interesting for us to come together as a community and discuss and make sure that we have a right approach, and we can provide the best coverage as possible, knowing that there's some potential challenges around adopting new technologies, centralizing data. Those sorts of things are always complicated, and it will be good to get some insight on that.
Great points, Richard. Closing remarks from you. What are you most looking forward to hearing?
Yeah, so I mean, I tend to come at this issue from more of a top-down approach, whereas perhaps Steve is more of a from bottom-up approach. And so we have different perspectives on this. But me, I'm very, very interested in sort of looking at how we're talking here about market conduct risk, but actually it's all framed around conduct, culture, other forms of financial crime risk. And what I'm seeing now more than ever is actually two things. One, our regulators started to coalesce, around these themes collectively rather than, specific elements of them. So for instance, rather than hearing people talk about market conduct risk, money laundering risk, we're starting to hear people talk about financial crimes risks in its in a holistic form. And how do we integrate across all those different risk themes and build scalability within that capability? I think in addition to that, I really feel at the moment our securities and our banking regulators are looking for us to push our surveillance programs to places where perhaps our privacy regulators, for example, and perhaps other regulatory regimes, might be reluctant to see us sort of move there. And I think that the communications of social media is a really interesting place where you might well see that. And so I think compliance professionals are going to be very torn between meeting the requirements of their securities regulators, for example, and not falling foul of very complex and very very significant privacy regulations. So it's where we start to see these challenges emerge between our different regulatory regimes and how are we solving those issues. And for me, those are the key things that I think. So that intersect across conduct culture, financial crimes risk more broadly, and actually how are there different regulatory regimes challenging us actually around meeting the demands of multiple regulators.
A holistic risk framework is very interesting. I think that how our monitoring and surveillance teams coming together, working together, I think that's an important factor into making sure that we have greater visibility into overall conduct and culture. And that's an important topic that we need to discuss for sure.
Yeah, no, and I think it fits well within Richard's top down and your bottom up. I think in the middle there's some real fundamental core issues. And look, I'm looking forward to digging through this at the conference with you guys and then also working out how to move this on as a industry conversation, because there are very few places in the financial services space where you have this much vendor activity within the boundaries of a firm dealing with very high risk activity. And then I think that's the key, is regulators have targeted things to do with the customer as high risk, which will mean you have to start applying a whole bunch more controls if you are doing it or are bringing vendors in, which gives us a great opportunity to say, okay, what makes it safe? What does good surveillance look like for 2025 when the EU AI Act comes in? Those are the kind of good conversations I'm looking to generate. So I'll draw a line under it here, but I thank you very much for helping to encapsulate the huge and important nature of this conversation. I look forward to having everybody at the conference in a month's time. So please follow the show notes, but make your way to regtechfs.com or the regtechconference.co.uk. Looking forward to speaking again soon.
You can go to our conference website, which is regtechconference.co.uk, or go to the JWG website, which is jwg-it.eu. This is Redcast,
where we shine a light on banking digitization.